Good morning. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Herb Jackson. I'm a member of the Newsmaker committee here. I'm also the Washington correspondent for the Bergen Record newspaper in northern New Jersey. I'm going to host today's Newsmaker with Christopher Ward, the Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Just a little housekeeping. Please turn your cell phones off or put them on silent. In a short while, Chris is going to speak for about half an hour, and then we'll take questions for half an hour. The club gives preference to members of the media who are asking questions, and please remember that there are working reporters around here and give them some respect for the work they have to do. If there's time and others want to ask questions after the media, we'll call on you. Please, everybody who asks questions, please identify yourself before you ask. Keep questions short. Just a few words about some upcoming events here in the club. If you didn't see them in the elevator, on Thursday we have the sold-out luncheon with Republican Congresswoman and congressional candidate Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota. And next Monday night on August 1st, the former Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Bob Graham will be discussing his new suspense novel, which draws on some of the unanswered questions from the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And now to our guest. Chris Ward has been executive director of the Port Authority since 2008. His resume includes leading a trade association for general contractors, running a port services company or stevedore company, if those of you who don't live in the port world, that operated at the Brooklyn and Elizabeth Marine Terminals, and numerous positions in New York City government, including Commissioner of Environmental Protection. The Port Authority not only runs one of the world's busiest cargo ports, it also controls the bridges and tunnels that connect New York and New Jersey, the Kennedy, LaGuardia, Newark, and Teterboro airports, the famous Port Authority bus terminal at 42nd Street, and the PATH train subway system. The Port Authority built the original World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan and is overseeing the reconstruction of what became Ground Zero on September 11, 2001. Chris Ward is credited with getting that project back on track, and he's here to provide us with a status report of what to expect, especially with the upcoming 10th anniversary of those attacks in a few months. Chris?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and be outside of the New York, New Jersey region talking about, obviously, this critical project. Today I will walk you through with some visuals on the history of this project, somewhat of the vision of the project, and then our sense of how it will unfold as part of New York City. In just under 7 weeks, the world will gather to remember and commemorate the nearly 3,000 people who were lost that day. It will then be 10 years. And with the upcoming anniversary, I just really wanted to take this opportunity to reflect back on what these 10 years have been and the progress we have made in rebuilding the World Trade Center, and then most importantly for what lies ahead. When you think about New York and you think about New Yorkers, we live in this gigantic metropolis, 17 million people covering the region. We speak about New York as the greatest city on earth. We see the soaring skyline, which is so indicative, the mass transit system, the MTA, which touches every part of the city. We see the necklaces of bridges around the region connecting New York, New Jersey, Long Island. And it is narratively the greatest city on earth. And it's our home. All of it is New York. And I think in some ways that what we lost on September 11th was that crucible, really that conversation that takes place between New Yorkers every single day with its city. And in rebuilding the World Trade Center, in some respects, we're restoring that conversation that people had with the old World Trade Center, and we are starting a new conversation for the city going forward. And I say all of this not because I'm in Washington, D.C., but to give you some perspective, I think, on the early parts of this project that were so difficult and were so contentious. If you followed it through all the meetings, the public hearings, literally the civic conversation, 3,000 people gathering in the Javits Arena to talk about what downtown should be, the private meetings amongst the key stakeholders, the city itself I think if you think about it, poured itself into the 16 acres. Everything that is getting built downtown is in some way a reflection of a city. We're building 10 million square feet. We are building a whole new Grand Central with the Path Calatrava station downtown. We're restoring street grids. We are building perhaps the most important memorial and museum. We are inevitably at some point building a cultural center. All of that is, in a sense, the civic virtue of what a city would be. And it was all, during this time, it was all to rise in one monumental gesture, in a sense, all rise at once, all be completed at once, and budgeted at once, that you could, in fact, have all of that vision and hope realized at one time. And in a sense, in the rush, I think, to fill that void, when we sought to do more, when we sought to really rebuild the city, to fully restore that conversation between New York and New Yorkers, we rushed into that void, and candidly, I think we stumbled. And what we sought, in the midst of all of, think about where this country was at the time, all that unparalleled change, the president talking about America standing tall, the need to send a message to the terrorists, for downtown to be realized as that new part of a new city, if you will, entirely within the existing city. We lost sight of really the more prosaic questions, the realistic questions of how do you build this project? How do you get it done? How do you know that the schedules for completion are in fact real? And how do you have a budget that actually mirrors the goals of what these visions have been set out? And as I said, candidly, I think we did stumble. And by the time I became executive director of the Port Authority in May of 2008, the lack of the answers to, as I said, those more practical questions had really kind of brought ground zero in the rebuilding of downtown, not to a halt, but really to a pace and a level that was really starting to create political problems for the Port Authority, raise questions of the future of the project. The federal government was looking at us and wondering, with the money that the feds were providing to us, was this project going to be realized? And so in 2008, under my direction, the Port Authority published a complete assessment. We took the project, we tore it apart, we looked at budgets, we looked at schedules, and we ended up developing detailed plans and strategies to address the most fundamental problems that were preventing progress. And I think really candidly, for the first time, we acknowledged the delays, and we spoke to New Yorkers and said, these are now realistic dates and realistic budgets, and we'll be transparent going forward, and we'll be accountable to the city on what we said we can now get done. And since that assessment, I can stand here today and say we have turned the project around. It now does have schedules, it does have budgets, and in a sense, all of the open-ended questions that were being asked time and time again have been answered. And I'd like to walk through what those questions were. But in 2008, the site was still entirely defined by the language of the pit. As you can see, this is the site in 2008, defined by the long walk, the ramp down that the families would take on each anniversary commemorating those that had been lost. Today, the site is defined exactly the opposite. It's being defined by the continual hum of 3,500 construction workers pouring over, as you can see, every single corner of the project, making tremendous progress every single day. And in the introduction, there was a reference to the fact that as part of that 2008 assessment, I committed that the Memorial Plaza, would be open by the 10th anniversary of the attacks. It would be open, as you can see, the waterfalls, each waterfall, the largest man-made waterfall in the United States, they would be flowing. And perhaps then most importantly, the names of all the people who were lost that day would be inscribed on the parapets surrounding the fountains. And today, the black granite pools, which frame the footprints of the original World Trade Center, are nearly complete. And as I said, the memorial will be open for the 10-year anniversary, and it will be a place for the families to gather, and it will be a place where I think we will welcome back President Obama, the two governors, and the mayor, to mark the closure of those 10 years. And I use the word closure cautiously because I think Obviously, if you've lost someone, the notion that there's actually closure to the event is not realistic. But there is a marking of time, which is, I think, important. And that marking of time, it's our hope that the past, that contentious, difficult past when people were frustrated progress, will then be behind us, and rather progress and the building of the World Trade Center will become the narrative going forward. And so the memorial pools are surrounded and complemented by a forest of American swamp oak trees. These were selected for their hardiness and their vibrant colors in the fall. And these trees will grow to a height of nearly 30 feet when they're mature. And I think New Yorkers are just beginning to grasp what this will mean. This is 4 times the size of Bryant Park in Midtown behind the public library. And this will be really a green oasis with all the 300 trees providing an incredible canopy. And it will be obviously a place of reflection for those people who did lose a loved one. But it'll also be, as I will get into, a part of New York. Most significantly, I think, when we published the assessment in 2008, our scheduled anticipation for completion of what you see here is the Memorial Pavilion, the entrance to the museum, wasn't going to be done until the second quarter of 2013. And as you can see, we are well ahead of schedule, and the pavilion, which will serve as the entrance to the museum, is nearly complete. And I think that is a reflection of the constructability goals that we built into the project. This is designed by the Norwegian architect Snohetta, and his vision of the building, the structure, is very interesting. He didn't want it to be a classic shape that everybody would then know, so it really is a shaper, depending on how you look at it and where you stand. It will have completely a different dimension and a different profile. And in a sense, his hope was that it would, in effect, disappear on the plaza and wouldn't detract from what else was going on. One World Trade is currently at the 76th floor, taking its place in the New York City skyline as it climbs to its full 104 floors. Workers are building now a new floor almost every week, and the glass curtain wall is racing up behind the steel frame. And by this September 11th, One World Trade Center will reach to the 80th floor, and it will top out in early 2012. At the southeast corner of the site, Larry Silverstein, our private developer partner, is building Tower 4, and it's gaining momentum. Tower 4 is currently at the 36th floor, in a sense framing the site from One World Trade to 4 World Trade in the other corner. One of the things that was critical about the site was the amount of below-grade infrastructure that had to get built. We have built 700,000 square feet of space below grade. And in some sense, this led to the frustration of where was the progress, because you couldn't really see it. But so while all this work is continuing above ground, progress in construction of the World Trade Center Transportation Hub is really reaching a staggering level. We've placed over 2,800 tons of steel, all below grade, to house what will be Calatrava's vision of a new Grand Central downtown. And as you will see in a minute, the space is simply stunning and soaring in its architecture. The more mundane aspects of this project, though, is the fact that we have to build the city's largest air conditioning plant, which will heat and cool all of the public space that I've referenced. And we're pulling water out of the Hudson River to build this huge system for the entire project. People don't like in Washington to use the word stimulus, I guess, but for this part of the project, the amount of people, highly skilled construction workers who are building this project, we're probably right now the largest public works project in the country. We have about 3,500 union construction workers building on this project every day. So it truly has become an engine for economic growth and job creation within the region. But having said all that, the progress at the World Trade Center site was not inevitable, as the delays ended up showing. It was tied to a series of key decisions that we and our building partners made in 2008 and must continue to make and implement in order that there are us to avoid complacency. We stopped trying to, in a sense, answer all those larger social, complex, political problems and questions surrounding the Trade Center, and recognized that as complicated as the site was, it first had to become a construction site, and it needed to be treated that way. So take the 9/11 memorial, which before our assessment and our strategy was not supposed to be completed until 2013. That was unacceptable. I mean, again, I don't think it's a matter of closure, but dates matter, and the 10th anniversary for the world, the nation, and the city to gather and have a sense of place was vitally important. And so we recognized you couldn't wait till 2013, and so we asked the engineers, if you had to deliver this on the 10-year anniversary, what would you do? And it was amazing. Over a hot, hot summer in New York, the men and women who work at the Port Authority figured out you could actually build this project from the top down. Logic would dictate you'd build from the ground, bedrock up, and you put the roof on last. What they figured out, as you can see in this drawing, is that you could, in fact, build the floor of the plaza at the same time you're building the ceiling of the below-grade transportation hub and take the project from the top to the bottom. And that's what has allowed us now to deliver the memorial on the 10-year anniversary. The Calatrava design, while soaring and stunning, also had its construction complexities. And working with Santiago, we convinced him that his column-free space, as you can see in these pictures, was going to present real engineering challenges, because each one of those steel members was going to have to be placed separately and then set according to the steel and how much it actually bowed. And without columns, that was going to be a very risky proposition to either delay the project or end up costing significant more money. So we convinced Santiago to use his same architectural treatment and introduce columns, which reduced that level of construction risk and allowed us to deliver it far earlier. One of the unknown facts of the site is there is literally an MTA subway box. The one train is elevated almost at grade and runs through the project. It's supported by a series of very small mini piles. Early on, there was a decision that service had to be maintained for the subway and that there would be no outages. And as you can see in the left, there was a very complicated strategy about how you would underpin that box to ensure safety. Again, with the top-down strategy, we were able to deliver the box, but most importantly, on top of that box will be Greenwich Street. And by doing, again, top-down, we were able to deliver Greenwich Street several years earlier than anticipated. And that's so important for the commercial viability of the site. For those of you who remember, the World Trade Center site was a super block in New York City. There was no internal street grid. Now with the plan for the way we've envisioned the project going forward, we'll be reestablishing those streets. And that street life is going to be important for the commercial viability of those towers. So while we overhaul the construction team and what our efforts were, we also brought in some real experts. And this is Turner and Tishman became our construction managers. And they took what we had pulled apart and amazingly loaded it into these series of software packages which track this project literally every day now. When we pour a foot of concrete, when we place a steel beam, when we run an inch of conduit, all of that is tracked on these building models that they have brought to this project, which allows us to choreograph the delivery of all of the material that's getting built, because in the constrained environment of Lower Manhattan, there's no place to store the amount of steel and materials. It literally has to be delivered to the site on a time of the essence basis every single night to be ready for the workers to use each part of the material going forward. The other thing that we completely restructured was the construction of the project. Early on, when this project was monumental, and I've used that word a couple of times now, because that's what was poured into the project. We were going to build a monumental new city. And to build a monumental new city, there was this construction consortium created, and words are important. They call themselves Phoenix, rising up out of the ground to create this new future. And it seemed like that would be best, that would work. Well, it didn't. In fact, it was a major drag on the productivity of the site, because if you try to build everything at once and you have no priority, nothing gets built. And so we recognized that we had to change that model. So once again, we tore the project apart and brought competition in. So now we have a series of contractors that you can see here who are working on the project. And it's amazing what competition can do. They are each competing against each other, and they are creating an environment of speed and progress, as I think the pavilion structure has demonstrated. And so while we did all of that work to get the project back online, we also had to tackle some other difficult issues. And one of those was making a concerted decision to rename the Freedom Tower One World Trade. And this was difficult. Obviously, pardon me. The language and the rhetoric after 9/11 was imbued with those kind of patriotic gestures. And when we looked at it, we were struggling with two issues. First, One World Trade needed to be a destination. It needed to be a building. It needed to be a part of downtown. So if you have a Two World Trade, you automatically need a One World Trade. And by calling it the Freedom Tower, it broke that logic of it being a building. And then similarly, America didn't lose its freedom on 9/11. We were free before, and we are free here today. And in a sense, New York needed a building, it needed infrastructure, but it really didn't need a political message. And so we changed the Freedom Tower to One World Trade. But all of that and all this time still begged the question of what was the future of downtown going to be. There was the perception that One World Trade, the Freedom Tower, would be a white elephant, that it would be filled with government workers, federal, city, state, and that it was really coming into a market that was not going to realize its true potential. But that changed, and it changed dramatically with the Port Authority successfully negotiating with Condé Nast, obviously you know, the huge media company, moving from Times Square, where they were an anchor tenant that transformed and cleaned up Times Square, to now come downtown with their 4,000 employees and take 1 million square feet. And if anything, in a sense, validates the progress and the certitude that we have that downtown is in fact on schedule and going to get built, is that kind of corporate response to One World Trade. The new houses came down, they asked a lot of hard questions, but in the end of the day, they recognized that this is the place that their employees wanted to be, and it was a place where they would once again make a statement about their commitment to New York City. And what's interesting about Condé Nast is that they are not the classic New York City up and out company, that the more successful, you then move to the suburbs, you move to Westchester, you move out to Long Island. Their employees want to stay in the city, and one of the key things was the transportation network that connects downtown for their employees so they could move into new neighborhoods but still get into downtown quickly. So all of this is, for us at the Port Authority, quite exciting, and we look forward to the progress and the president visiting with the two governors and the mayor. But we have to also recognize that it's not unstoppable, that bad things and difficult questions still remain. And moving forward, there's an enormous amount of work to be done, decisions to be made, and milestones to be met. It is not today even without considerable risk. But I think, having said that, that since the first time since 9/11, we do have certainty about what's being built, how much it will cost, and when it'll be completed. And we have a concrete plan today to get us there, and we're seeing real tangible progress. So by turning the World Trade Center into a construction site, the Port Authority can step back, I think, and allow New Yorkers to start their own conversation with downtown. And I think that's what we hope the future will end up being. And so that now try to imagine what a conversation between a New Yorker and downtown will be like over the next few years. First, pardon me, it will have to start, as I said, with the Memorial Plaza. 8 acres of unique green space, 4 times the size of Bryant Park, and the heart of a new downtown. And of course, the memorial will provide a place of a place for gathering, for people to think about what they lost. But it's not only going to be those who lost a loved one who will be on this plaza. It will be that green space, and it'll be part of New Yorkers cutting across the plaza on a rainy day, or someone meeting before a date in Lower Manhattan before they go out to dinner, place to grab a sandwich. And in a sense, the memorial will be all of those things, all of those conversations. And so people ask what I think downtown is becoming. I think it's becoming New York. It's open, it's democratic, it's available to all, it's where people live, work, and play, and I think it will start with the incredible space of the Memorial Plaza. Meanwhile, that conversation that I spoke about in terms of Calatravas will start to take place. Again, the interplay in New York City of people's knowledge about mass transit, whether it's the MTA or the PATH, and that while we've seen the federal government retreat from its role in transportation, the Port Authority and the MTA are moving aggressively forward with a $20 billion spending program to create new mass transit hubs throughout the city. And I think this will redefine transportation expectations for Lower Manhattan as we're connecting literally 13 subway lines, 33 bus routes, and a PATH system and a brand new ferry terminal on the Hudson River connecting New York and New Jersey. The other connectivity that's going to stimulate downtown is the amount of retail that we've invigorated into the project. Downtown will no longer, particularly with Condé Nast, be that classic financial center that goes dark at night. We'll be building 500,000 square foot of retail that will allow you to connect from one part of the island of Manhattan underground all the way through this site, 500,000 square feet of premier retail underneath the West Side Highway and then up into the Winter Garden and the World Financial Center. So again, it will be both a shortcut, but it'll also be a vibrant part of a 24/7 community that Governor Cuomo, Mayor Bloomberg have been touting as the real foundation for a new downtown. But even still, our conversation won't end there. It will continue with the skyline. And in my 3 years as executive director, I've come to appreciate the fact that New Yorkers judge progress by skyscrapers. Paris might be the city of lights, Chicago the city of, I guess, big shoulders, but New York City has to be the city of big buildings, and it really wasn't until New York could see that One World Trade Center rising in downtown that they really were worried about progress. But now we know where that towering signpost will be, and New York City will have its exclamation point in One World Trade Center. And joining all the other great towers, I think it provides balance to the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building in Midtown. There will now be balance for downtown. In the region, driving in and around the region, it'll be a point of reference as far away as Long Island and on the New Jersey Turnpike. And the great American writer Henry James once said that the New York City skyline is swept clean every 25 years. He didn't like American change. It was too rapid for him. He liked the idea of Europe with its cathedrals and its castles. But for New York and New Yorkers, we embrace change, and I think we need it. The New York City office space market is growing old. It's really failing in terms of competition worldwide. So what greater sweeping example of the dynamic transformation that has always defined New York than a new green city downtown of office towers that are not only stunning but also built, LEED certified, and sustainable going forward. And so each one of these massive changes will fundamentally alter the conversation between New York and New Yorkers. And one day soon, New Yorkers will pride themselves on knowing the quickest way to get to the PATH train, how to get to their office, where to pick up flowers at the last minute for an anniversary, and which park has the best benches for a sandwich. And to be sure, challenges do remain, and there is much left to build and much office space to fill. Our work is far from over. But our vision for New Downtown is about something more. It is about New Yorkers renewing their own conversation with the great city, a conversation that will change and evolve every single day. And soon that conversation will include the new World Trade Center and a whole new city within the greatest city on earth. Thank you very much. And now we can take questions.
Yeah, why don't you stay there and I'll just do this one. I had one question just from the start. You mentioned that it's got a budget. I believe that's $11 billion. You on target, or are rumors that toll payers and the bridges and tunnels are going to have to chip in a little more to pay for this?
Well, first of all, we are on budget, and we watch that and track that closely every single day. But the Port Authority's overall financial capacity is what drives the need, or the not lack of a need, for tolls and fares. But so we are on budget, we're tracking it every day, and we're optimistic we're going to be able to complete it as we planned.
And please identify yourself.
Michael Fishman, NPC member. My understanding is that roughly 80 years ago, when the Empire State Building was constructed, it went up at a fraction of the time that One World Trade Center is going up. How do you account for the difference? Does it have to do with safety features, or are there other issues that account for it?
I think clearly you put your finger on one of them. I think something like 20 people died in the construction of the Empire State Building. OSHA and building safety practices were not nearly as stringent as they should be today. The fundamental difference, though, is that the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, the Goldman Sachs Building downtown were all built in open space. They were driven into bedrock, foundations were poured, and they rose up. One World Trade is built on top of an operating path train. So the complexity of the foundations to bridge over those tunnels was enormous. Then the complexity of dealing with the largest tower on the site, which could, in this world we now live in, be subject to another attack. We've been attacked twice. That the whole foundation has inherent in it a strategy of safety and security to avoid a cataclysmic attack of a truck bomb at grade. So in addition to building on top of path, that whole foundation for One World Trade is an armored steel podium that will be able to withstand 1,000-ton truck bomb, so 1,000-pound truck bomb. So add all of that complexity together, having to build 700,000 square feet below grade, we think this project needed to take this amount of time and shouldn't be compared to the Empire State Building.
Raju Chebian from Gannett Newspapers.
Sure.
Quick question, sir, about the $11 billion you're talking about. Where is the money coming from, and what's the public-private breakdown on that?
Well, the $11 billion is the Port Authority's contribution to the site. Overall, the project will probably cost around $20 billion. 11 comes from the Port Authority. As was referenced by the earlier question, the Port Authority sustains itself on tolls and fares within the region, as well as aviation fees and leases, as well as our port operations. We take all of that revenue and then go out into the bonding market and raise debt to build our projects. So we're in for about $11 billion. The federal government is providing $2.2 billion for the transportation hub, the Calatrava, and the remainder is the private investment by Larry Silverstein.
Okay. And you also mentioned during your talk that there is about $20 billion worth of mass transit projects underway. Is that separate from what you're talking about, or is that included in the $20 billion that you?
It's a subset. That's a subset of both what the Port Authority is doing for mass transit and what the MTA is doing with their mass transit projects. So it's everything that's going on within the city. The PATH, $3.2 billion PATH station, plus the MTA projects such as East Side Access, Second Avenue Subway, is the $20 billion mass transit figure.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm Amanda Seitz from the Daily Caller. A couple weeks ago when the memorial was unveiled, there was some criticism about the language not including language regarding the attacks that had occurred, and I just wanted to get your comment on that, and if you could talk about that criticism at all and that decision not to include that language.
Well, first of all, my disclaimer is that the Port Authority is not the developer or builder or curator of the memorial and the museum, and that is being done by the Memorial Museum Foundation, the not-for-profit that Mayor Bloomberg has set up. I'll only comment on the fact that I think this remains one of the most difficult curatorial museums in terms of what goes into that it's a lot of very difficult questions, and there was a choice to not expand it out into that conversation, if you will, but to keep it focused on the people who were lost and what happened to the city that day.
And I believe the tickets for the memorial have become available already. How far out are those subscribed? Because you're controlling the number of visitors each
Right,
day,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I could have mentioned this. So, obviously, on the 10-year anniversary, Obama and the two governors will be there, and, you know, the world will see it. The mayor made it clear, and the two governors made it clear, that public access onto that plaza was essential on day 2, September 12th. It remains, as you saw, though, a major, major construction site that we needed to ensure that people were safe and it was, in fact, secure. So in order to do that, there is a website-based ticketing system that gives you time and date for when to show up and when you can spend your time on the plaza. There's no restriction for how long you can stay on the plaza. That's your choice. They're expecting as many as 1,500 people visiting per hour early on. I think the numbers when the website first went up was 35,000 people requested tickets on the first day. and it's a rolling process that I think is about 3 months out in advance.
So it's booked for 3 months already.
I believe so.
Gentlemen.
Hey, Devlin Barrett with the Wall Street Journal. You keep talking about conversation. I'm curious, do you believe the term ground zero still belongs in the conversation? Ground zero was originally meant to apply to two specific things in my mind, the destruction site and then the empty space. I'm curious if you think it's time to retire that phrase.
A lot of people ask that. I think it's probably premature. I think until the site has restored everything to grade, towers 2, 3, and 4 have been brought up to grade, I think that's when the conversation should start to shift away from ground zero, but I think it's probably a little premature now.
And when do you think we get to grade?
The end of 2013, beginning of 2014.
So, if just so I understand this clearly, on September 11th of this year,
Yes.
what will be ready and open for viewing would be the memorial, every aspect of it, and it'll be complete, including the front that you were talking about, the museum front and the museum itself.
Let me be very clear, because the Memorial Plaza will be established. There will still be trees that will not be planted because they are in the frame of the construction work that is ongoing. There will be about 220 trees out of a total of over 300. The fountains will be functioning, and the parapets with the names will all be fully inscribed. There will be public access to get onto that plaza, as I said, and walk around each one of the fountains in its entirety and read the names. The museum pavilion will be constructed, but it will not be available for use because the museum below grade won't be finished until probably the end of 2012.
So the pavilion is, I guess, comparable to the pyramid that covers the entrance to the Louvre. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's a
It's
very good
something
yeah.
above ground that takes you down into the entrance area?
Yes, exactly. And in fact, one of the architectural features of it is it comes out and gets increasingly transparent and is glass, and inside the glass are two large tridents from the original World Trade Center, that archetype of Yamaguchi's base, which was carrying the steel down and then spreading out into a trident form at the entry level.
In the back?
Heather Forsman Weaver, writing for the NPC's Wire. When will it no longer be a construction site on the outside? You know, notwithstanding whatever may be going on inside the buildings. But when you go there, will it no longer look like a construction site?
Well, like all answers, it's a little complicated. I would typically say that it won't be a construction site by the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015. The only issue is towers 2, 3, and 4, which are Larry Silverstein's private development. Tower 2 will only rise when Larry Silverstein has private market tenants that can fully finance that building. There will be no public financing in Tower 2, which, since I can't predict what the real estate market will do, that might be just built to grade by the end of 2014, 2015. If the market comes roaring back and is robust, then that tower would be rising in that time frame for completion around 2017, 2018. But from a public infrastructure perspective, the end of 2014, beginning of 2015.
So it's possible that the public work will be done beginning of 2015, but then there'll be another building that is privately financed that could go till 2018?
Correct.
And One World Trade Center, which is the one that the authority and its customers are on the hook for, you've leased, how many floors to Condé Nast, and how was the rest of the leasing in that done?
We've leased 1 million to Condé Nast. We've leased
Million square feet?
square feet, yeah.
So how many of the 104 floors is that?
It's about 20 floors. It's from floor 20 to, no, I'm sorry, it's 40 floors. It's from 20 to 60. It's a huge building. It's 3.2 million square feet. We've signed China Center Vantone, which is 200,000 square feet. We are negotiating, in fact, with GSA a smaller amount of square feet than they had previously envisioned, which again I think is a sign of the optimism for downtown. You know, early on, the federal commitment, I think, was to give it an anchor tenant, and that was going to be 600,000 square feet. And now we're discussing and negotiating with the GSA for 300,000 square feet, which would allow us to bring in other private sector tenants at hopefully significantly higher rents.
And that's the General Services Administration, which would be federal office.
Correct.
Just curious, wouldn't it be easier to find tenants and fill up the space if you stopped calling it Ground Zero? Isn't it harder to sell space in Ground Zero as opposed to space in the World Trade Center, whatever you would call it?
You know, you ask a good question. I think we struggled and successfully transformed the Freedom Tower to One World Trade. I think inevitably, given your earlier question, the narrative of Ground Zero will shift. And I don't think right now, given Condé Nast, that it is a drag on leasing. The amount of tenants, large block, law firms, media companies that are down looking at the tower, as well as looking at Larry Silverstein's tower, we are increasingly optimistic about the marketability of those towers and don't see Ground Zero being a drag on that perception.
Have the commercial property managers spoken to you about this? Have they?
Yeah, we have, believe me, the Port Authority has a lot of commercial property reps working for us, talking to us, and a lot of people ask the similar question is, what's the fear of the site? Will this be a site that people will be reluctant to tenant, to work in? And honestly, I think the answer to that is no. I think Condé Nast demonstrated. I like to think that people on the first day think about safety and security and understand how One World Trade, for example, was built. But on the second day, just see a beautiful tower that I think is going to be some stunning, stunning office space.
My name is Sarah Becker. I'm with the Crier Media Group. You said on the 10th anniversary, basically, that you wanted to mark closure of the 10 years. You also referenced building a new monumental city. What on September 11th is the historical message that will be spoken?
I think the historical message will be that part of the day's event and the 10 years are behind us now, and that there is a place for families to gather, but more importantly, there is a place for the city to see its future.
You mentioned, and Ann Walters with the German Press Agency, you mentioned a little bit earlier about the foundation and how that is built in such a way to hinder terrorist attacks. Could you talk a little bit more about what kind of other precautions you're taking as the anniversary approaches and the threat of the possible anniversary type terrorist
Sure.
attack comes up?
Obviously, there are a lot of things that I can't share about that in our coordination with Ray Kelly and NYPD. But the security plan for downtown is incredibly robust. The city's commitment of upwards of 600 police officers downtown is a reflection of that concern. and we think we'll be ready for those days' events. The site itself is designed in a way to protect it, and the cooperation between the FBI, the Anti-Terrorist Task Force, NYPD, and the Port Authority, I think, is about as good as it can be, and that's what you do every day when you own this site.
All right, thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. People gathering in the Javits Arena to talk about what downtown should be. The private meetings amongst the key stakeholders. The city itself, I think, if you think about it, poured itself into the 16 acres. Everything that is getting built downtown is in some way a reflection of a city. We're building 10 million square feet. We are building a whole new Grand Central with the Path Calatrava station downtown. We're restoring street grids. We are building perhaps the most important memorial and museum. We are inevitably at some point building a cultural center. All of that is, in a sense, the civic virtue of what a city would be. And it was all, during this time, it was all to rise in one monumental gesture, in a sense, all rise at once, all be completed at once, and budgeted at once, that you could, in fact, have all of that vision and hope realized at one time. And in a sense, in the rush, I think, to fill that void, when we sought to do more, when we sought to really rebuild the city, to fully restore that conversation between New York and New Yorkers, we rushed into that void, and candidly, I think we stumbled. And what we sought, in the midst of all of, think about where this country was at the time, all that unparalleled change, the president talking about America standing tall, the need to send a message to the terrorists, for downtown to be realized as that.
Good morning. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name's Herb Jackson. I'm a member of the Newsmaker committee here. I'm also the Washington correspondent for the Bergen Record newspaper in northern New Jersey. I'm going to host today's Newsmaker with Christopher Ward, the Executive Director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Just a little housekeeping. Please turn your cell phones off or put them on silent. In a short while, Chris is going to speak for about half an hour, and then we'll take questions for half an hour. The club gives preference to members of the media who are asking questions, and please remember that there are working reporters around here, and give them some respect for the work they have to do. If there's time and others want to ask questions after the media, we'll call on you. Please, everybody who asks questions, please identify yourself before you ask. Keep questions short. Just a few words about some upcoming events here in the club. If you didn't see them in the elevator, on Thursday we have the sold-out luncheon with Republican Congresswoman and congressional candidate Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota. And next Monday night on August 1st, the former Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Bob Graham will be discussing his new suspense novel, which draws on some of the unanswered questions from the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And now to our guest. Chris Ward has been Executive Director of the Port Authority since 2008. His resume includes leading a trade association for general contract.
That new part of a new city, if you will, entirely within the existing city. We lost sight of really the more prosaic questions, the realistic questions of how do you build this project? How do you get it done? How do you know that the schedules for completion are in fact real? And how do you have a budget that actually mirrors the goals of what these visions have been set out? And as I said, candidly, I think we did stumble. And by the time I became Executive Director of the Port Authority in May of 2008, the lack of the answers to, as I said, those more practical questions had really kind of brought ground zero in the rebuilding of downtown, not to a halt, but really to a pace and a level that was really starting to create political problems for the Port Authority, raise questions of the future of the project. The federal government was looking at us and wondering, with the money that the feds were providing to us, was this project going to be realized? And so in 2008, under my direction, the Port Authority published a complete assessment. We took the project, we tore it apart, we looked at budgets, we looked at schedules, and we ended up developing detailed plans and strategies to address the most fundamental problems that were preventing progress. And I think really candidly, for the first time, we acknowledged the delays and we spoke to New Yorkers and said, these are now realistic dates and realistic budgets, and we'll be transparent going forward and we'll be accountable to the city on what we said we can now get done. And since
Actors running a port services company or stevedore company, if those of you who don't live in the port world, that operated at the Brooklyn and Elizabeth Marine terminals, and numerous positions in New York City government, including Commissioner of Environmental Protection. The Port Authority not only runs one of the world's busiest cargo ports, it also controls the bridges and tunnels that connect New York and New Jersey, the Kennedy, LaGuardia, Newark, and Teterboro airports, the famous Port Authority bus terminal at 42nd Street, and the PATH train subway system. The Port Authority built the original World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan and is overseeing the reconstruction of what became Ground Zero on September 11, 2001. Chris Ward is credited with getting that project back on track, and he's here to provide us with a status report of what to expect, especially with the upcoming 10th anniversary of those attacks in a few months. Chris?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and be outside of the New York, New Jersey region talking about, obviously, this critical project. Today I will walk you through with some visuals on the history of this project, somewhat of the vision of the project, and then our sense of how it will unfold as part of New York City. In just under 7 weeks, the world will gather to remember and commemorate the nearly 3,000 people who were lost that day. It will then be 10 years. And with the upcoming anniversary, I just really wanted to take this opportunity to reflect back on what these 10 years have been and the progress we have made in rebuilding the World Trade Center, and then most importantly for what lies ahead. When you think about New York and you think about New Yorkers, we live in this gigantic metropolis, 17 million people covering the region. We speak about New York as the greatest city on earth. We see the soaring skyline, which is so indicative, the mass transit system, the MTA, which touches every part of the city. We see the necklaces of bridges around the region connecting New York, New Jersey, Long Island. And it is narratively the greatest city on earth. And it's our home. All of it is New York. And I think in some ways that what we lost on September 11th was that crucible, really that conversation that takes place between New Yorkers every single day with its city. And in rebuilding the World Trade Center, in some respects, we're restoring that conversation that people had with the old World Trade Center, and we are starting a new conversation for the city going forward. And I say all of this not because I'm in Washington, D.C., but to give you some perspective, I think, on the early parts of this project that were so difficult and were so contentious. If you followed it through all the meetings, the public hearings, literally the civic conversation, 3,000